Good evening. Welcome to Up Late with the Dungeon Master on Polyhedral Paradise. I'm your host, Jason. How is everybody doing tonight? If you're watching on replay, thanks for joining us. If you're here now, double thanks for joining us. We do this every Wednesday night following Fanjecture, who follows the Nerd Card Showdown. And for anybody who doesn't know, the elimination round of the Nerd Card Showdown was tonight, and following tonight's already planned theme of loss, we're going to discuss it a little bit. We're also going to discuss the life and death of one of my favorite fictional characters, who you too will learn to love as much as I once did, one Wilson Tremblefoot. And finally, tonight, we are going to get into this right here, the Art and Arcana book. Oh, look at that. Dungeons and Dragons, Art and Arcana, the complete history of D&D. But you know what? That's later. For now, let me say hi to everybody who is here. Wu-Tang Wells, good evening. Lavas, how are you? Gray, bonjour. And let's see, who else we got? Adam from Fanjecture, great to see you. Elbow D&D. Yes, we're definitely going to talk about D&D. 24 minutes. Yes, it was a little bit longer. I apologize for my tardiness. Sorry. I had to run a couple errands. So, let's see. And we have the amazing Miss Tara's on. Tara, how are you doing this evening? Thank you guys so much for coming this evening. I know I'm a little later than I usually am, but ran into some things. So, first, guys, while we wait to see if anybody comes in here, let's start with a little story. There's a warrior. He wakes up at the bottom of a pile of bodies. His eyes blackened and covered with a wet substance which he can only assume is the blood of his enemies. He wriggles himself free of the mass of bodies above him and pulls himself up out of the pile. He's lost everything. His weapon, his tribe, his people. Climbs out of that pile of bodies and looks at the devastation around him, the lone survivor of a proud clan. He looks off in the distance and sees a cliff edge. Cliff calls to him. He staggers, dazed and confused, not knowing where to go and not knowing what to do anymore. The cliff beckons to him. He looks back one last time at the devastation and destruction and wonders, what was it all for? What was the fighting and the struggle and the pain and the heartache? What was it all for at this point? He looks down at his hands, soaked and blood-stained, fingers probably broken. Two of them he can't even feel anymore. And he walks further to the cliff. He approaches the cliff face and stares down. The sea below it, the jagged rocks having the sea crash against it. The spray, he can almost taste it even from 1,000 feet up. He wonders, how hard would it be? How hard would it be to take that last little step off the edge of the cliff and end everything? The suffering, the hurt, the pain he's caused other people, the pain he's caused himself. How hard could it be? His knees buckle, and they hit the ground before he can think. His hands, not far behind, brace himself against the cliff edge, not sure if the right move is the right move. He looks up at the sky, giving one last look at the setting sun, knowing that he's failed, knowing that it wasn't worth the cost, knowing that he will never see another battlefield. But then a voice cries to him, the voice of one of his comrades, one of his friends, one of the people he thought he lost, one of the people that thought he had failed And off in the distance, he hears a, "You can't." Ever so slight, ever so distant. It's just a simple, "You can't." It's not the end. Failure is not measured in wins and losses. Failure is measured in the end of trying. And it is in that moment the warrior picks his head up, not sure whether the voice that he heard was real or imaginary, but curious nonetheless. And he turns and he sees, also emerging from that pile of bodies, that pile of broken bones and broken hearts and broken dreams, the figures of his friends, also broken and beaten and defeated, their hearts also crushed and aching and hurt. They too wondered the same thing in their own time, but also, stumbling towards that cliff, saw their friend and realized in that moment that all wasn't lost, that maybe all the fighting was worth it. And seeing their friend about to do the ultimate evil that one can do and give up emboldened them to go on. As they approached the cliff, the man rose to his feet, his knees weak, his hands barely able to push himself up off the cliff face. He turns and looks at the faces of his three friends. One of them says, "Shit, man, I was almost too sad to roll this blunt. But you know what? Fuck it, you gotta do the stream anyway." It was in that moment he realized that, you know, even though you lose in life and you lose these battles and you lose friends and you lose hope, it's never really over. As long as along the way you found the thing that matters, and that's friends that you can go to battle with and you can ride with. And if that warrior took nothing from that experience, is that those three people that arose from that pile of bodies with him that day would always be there. He would always be able to count on them, no matter how many battles they lost or how many battles they won. They was friends. The fact that they had met each other and fought that battle together, that was the real victory. And on that day, even though they got their asses handed to them, you know, the hell, there's always tomorrow. So there's that little story of the warrior that got his ass handed to him, but kept on going. So I don't know. Let's see what you guys got to say in chat. So let's see. Spewing is tough. Let it down. Yeah, no, not really. So, in case you didn't know, that was a little veiled reference to what took place today, where the Slipper Clan ended up losing an elimination round of the Nerd Card Showdown. Yeah, so that was a tough one, but it was fun. You know, I love story time too, Gray. I love story time too. Broke my heart a little bit too. So, let's see. Honored to have had it in the first place to break it. Amen to that. So yeah. So I don't want to dwell on that too long. But yeah, so that was much just my little introduction. So you know, this tonight is gonna be about loss. And I actually it's funny because before this had happened, I did plan on talking about the character Wilson Tremblefoot. Now we're gonna get into Wilson Tremblefoot. I know you guys aren't not everybody here is as big into D&D, so this may not resonate with you, the story I'm going to tell. But recently, um, as you know, like I started playing fifth edition again, and I started running a campaign for a few new friends of mine, Josh from the Den of Nerds, and a bunch of his friends too. I don't want to call them by name because I'm not sure how they feel about that, so I could call them by their character's name, which is Barsus, Anarok, and um, oh my gosh, uh, Obelisk Night Sorrow. So we'll just call them by that. So they they met a man named Wilson Tremblefoot. Wilson Tremblefoot was a dragonborn, good at disguising himself as a regular human. He was a rogue pit fighter. Um, what they don't know about Wilson Tremblefoot is that Wilson Tremblefoot had been around since 1986. Wilson Tremblefoot was my original character when I first started playing before I decided to be a DM. He started out as a thief. So, to understand the gravity of what happened to him, I have to take you back to his beginnings. So, you don't mind coming along with me on a little bit of personal story time, do you? Everybody in chat, does anybody mind listening to some personal story time? So, I guess you don't. So, when I was first edition to the first interest, when I was first introduced to Dungeons and Dragons, my first character that I wanted to play was a thief because I just had an affinity for thieves. They were low powered, uh, they were shifty, they were sneaky, and they didn't like confrontation. And that was me at the time. I was sneaky and didn't like confrontation, so the thief character called to me. So I created the character Wilson Tremblefoot. Now, the first time I was a player, um, don't remember the exact game to be honest. I believe it was Castle Amber. Castle Amber was an interesting story because it was very psychological. It was a mystery of sorts where you would go through and there were people that were alive and there were people that were dead and there was this big mystery you had to solve and it had to do with somebody who had was a deceased immortal. Long story short, I ran through that. I loved it. Wilson Tremblefoot performed admirably. He avoided going mad. He came out in the end richer, and that was one of my first experiences with playing D&D. Shortly after that, we ran through the. I know you know this name by now. We ran through the module of Ravenloft, the I6 Ravenloft. My friend David ran it, and Ravenloft was also psychological. It was horror themed. It was sandbox, and Wilson Tremblefoot nearly died at that point in time. But he stole the Sun Sword, and the Sun Sword was a key to defeating Strahd von Zarovich. So shortly after that, I started DMing, so I shelved Wilson Tremblefoot. I turned him into an NPC. In the Isle of Creen uh, module that I created, he was a shopkeeper who had retired after stealing the Sun Sword and ran. He was a shifty shopkeeper. Uh, so he he would he would try to pickpocket, go around and pickpocket while the people were shopping. And being a little kid, I was an imp, and he ended up stealing a bunch of things from the party members. So he actually he got into a fight, and he was expelled from the town. So that was the first time I ran him as an NPC. He appeared a couple different times in Arende as after he left the shopkeeper there, he went to an island of Arende, and when I ran a a campaign for somebody where they had to hire a merchant marine, he ended up as one of the deckhands. Um, so he was Wilson Tremblefoot was low at this point, man. He wasn't very high on himself. He was low because he wasn't doing much with his life. He was a merchant marine, but he assisted them as an NPC on that trip, and he gained a lot of experience, and he eventually transitioned into a fighter. So I took them from a thief to a fighter. So he started learning the craft of fighting. So I pulled him out of retirement shortly after that when my friend, this was probably the early 90s, wanted to run some adventures. And I think it was the Isle of Dread that he ran, and I ran through the Isle of Dread. It was Wilson Tremblefoot, but at this time he had cross classed into thief and fighter. Now, if anybody knows anything about cross classing in first edition, it was hard to do. There was a lot of what do you call it? You had a lot of negatives in doing that, but I did it anyway. But he learned how to fight. He got proficient with sword. He turned out to be a little badass. Um, but then again, there was only one campaign that I ran him with. So then I shelved him again and started using him as an NPC. I used him again, uh, but this time he became a what do you call it? Like a tour guide, not a tour guide, but oh my gosh, I can't think of what the name is. Like somebody you went to and hired him to show you, I guess, a tour guide, but only like a tour guide who could fight. And this was in a homebrew I did. It was an area called the Pact of the Seven Kingdoms. Um, there was somebody after a rod of power. I mean, it was still young age, so the stories weren't fully developed. But at that point in time, he had become a good fighter, and he was really excelling. He was really growing. And even though I wasn't playing him, I was really attached to him because this was, quite a few years I'd been using this character. So he eventually retired again, and he went off to study martial arts in a monk town called Nababdabin, I think it was, and he studied under a monk for several years. At least that was the head canon. So I pulled him out of retirement once we started third edition, and he went on some adventures as an NPC with. He went on some adventures as some NPC with my friend Paul and his group. Although they didn't know him by that name. He was kind of low key. And at that point in time, he had already learned a little bit how to become a monk. So the man was a thief, a fighter, and now he transitioned into a monk. So he knew how to use his martial weapons. So his hands were like weapons and badass. So we ran through a campaign with him, and he was starting to become fully fleshed out after like 13, 14 years at this point. So I brought him out of retirement again when my friend John wanted to run his own campaign. So for about 3 or 4 sessions, I pulled him out, and we did it was like a wintry campaign. They were up in the mountains hunting a bunch of exotic animals, and we spent a lot of time up in the mountains. The campaign fizzled out after 4 or 5 sessions, and he stumbled across another monastery up in the mountains. So I left him there, and he studied for a decade learning forbidden monk techniques. And at that point in time, he learned an augmented flurry of blows, which was like uber badass and uber powerful. And he stayed up there for quite some time. While he was up there, we ran a one shot with my friend Corey, who wanted to do a half breed campaign where he took his characters and they would end up becoming infected with some type of monster. So I ran that, and Wilson Tremblefoot ended up becoming affected with a dragon disease, which started to turn his skin scaly, and it's basically started to turn him into what would become in 5th edition the Dragonborn. So that was his result, and he was left for dead on a snow-capped peak, being completely turned into a dragon. And I kind of left him there. I left it at that because at that point in time, I didn't intend on playing anymore. I really hadn't done anything but DMing. So the character to me sort of in my head that he could have been left for dead on the peaks. Is everybody tracking so far? Everybody following the story? I hope so. I know it's a little long-winded, but there's going to be a payoff, I promise. So a couple years later, I needed another. My friend Paul was running through a campaign that I had built where he had to deal with somebody going after the wand of Orcus and a resurrected god named Job. And Paul, one of the story beats I used was that Paul wanted to become a half dragon. So at that point, I pulled out of the bag of tricks the old story that was used on Wilson Tremblefoot. So I sort of used that as a template. Well, what a better time to pull Tremblefoot out of retirement than to when Paul had to go through the same thing. So I pulled Wilson Tremblefoot out of retirement. It turns out he had survived the peaks. He had stumbled down the mountain, and he had lived a life in seclusion in this temple. And the temple was the one that Paul happened to stumble onto. So, boom, out of nowhere, Tremblefoot's reborn, right? And I had fun with him. Like Paul went through the ringer at because of what Tremblefoot put him through. Now, he didn't do it directly, but Paul was sort of beset upon by Wilson Tremblefoot. Like he he gave him his curse. So, cough button. Sorry. So, so the campaign with Paul fizzled out after a while, as campaigns do. And side note about campaigns, um, they very rarely come to their conclusion. So the thing if I can tangent here, I need the tangent alert button. Enjoy the campaigns when you can, because there's no guarantee that they're going to be seen through to the end. Very rarely do they ever conclude. But yeah, but anyway, so Tremblefoot remained in the temple for a while until he decided that he wanted to go, at least in my head, go out adventuring. And he did. He went out adventuring, and he found out it tied into another campaign that I had started for my friend Aladris, or my friend's name was Mark, but his character's name was Aladris, and he was a paladin. And he was a paladin that went and tried to fight a demon named Grazitz. And with the help of the NPC, Wilson Tremblefoot, he ended up trapping Grazitz in a pit and sealing him off from from reality forever. So people sung stories about this paladin trapping Grazitz. So this is sort of the end of the run where I was playing 3.5. So this character had been around at this point for close to 20 years. It's had him built up quite a bit and fully developed. So bringing up the present day, and the reason I wanted to give you this backstory. When Josh approached and wanted to have me DM for him, and I jumped into 5th edition. Serendipitously, one of the features of Obelisk Night Sorrow was that his uncle was involved in resurrecting the demon Orcus. So Orcus is, like I said, he's a demon, but it turns out that I had experience with the Wand of Orcus, and so had Wilson Tremblefoot. And also, Orcus has dealings with Grazitz, who's Tremblefoot has had dealings with too. So I thought, why not a great time to bring this generational character out of retirement? So I stuck him in the new campaign, and it was great because he has been involved since the beginning. First as a playable character, then an NPC. So I had him in hiding at the fighting pits, sort of retired in this one town called Onus. He was in the fighting pits, and Josh's character went up against him in the pits without knowing what he was. And Josh's character put up a good fight, but he got beaten pretty handily. And it was okay because he had the augmented flurry of blows, and he really took it to him. So it was nice to have Tremblefoot back in the picture. So he decided that he wanted to take Wilson Tremblefoot on their adventure to go after the one. So sorry. So when they how can I put this? So he ended up traveling with him. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. He ended up traveling with him to this island that was through the mist on another continent, and they were going after the one. And Josh and his group left Tremblefoot on a boat along with some other crew members. And they ended up going through some stuff, and they ended up pissing off a wizard pretty badly. Okay. And here's where it gets interesting and why we're going to talk about loss. So Wilson Tremblefoot is back on the boat with the rest of Josh's crew. Josh pisses off a very powerful wizard. Josh's crew does. And I go down. I'm like, okay, well, there's going to be some consequences because the wizard knows where Josh's ship is, and he's going to send somebody down there. Okay, so what does he do? And then so I write up my chart. So DMs, if nobody's DM before, charts are a big thing. Okay, so you've got I did a D20 chart. So I've got 1 through 5, 6 through 10, 10 through All right, 11 through 15, and 16 through 20. And what I did on a whim was like, okay, who's this guy behead? And I'm just writing stuff down, crew members, random crew member names, Wilson Tremblefoot, da da da, yeah, da 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 da. Da. And then I roll on this chart. And I ended up rolling that I don't remember what the one crew member's name is because honestly, it doesn't matter. And Wilson Tremblefoot gets beheaded. Wilson Tremblefoot, the character that I had spent 30 years with, my very first character, the character that I had taken from a concept through all these experiences and through all these different NPCs, and I've pulled them out of retirement and I played with them, and I developed this relationship whether anybody else had known it or not. And I just rolled on a chart that unceremoniously, off screen, that I just beheaded him. That's it. And just like that, a 30-some year relationship with a fictional character is over. And I stared at it. Space paper. I stared at it for 15 minutes at first, 20 minutes, and 30 minutes. And I took my pencil. I was going to scratch it out because I can do that. I'm the DM. I didn't have to do it. Then I was like, you know what? I can't. Because it's time. And I didn't want it to end that way, but that's the way the dice rolled out, you know? And I just, as much as I had the right to change that, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't bring myself to change what fate had decided for old Wilson Tremblefoot. So, the start of the next game, the mage confronts Josh. Josh's character throws out a bag. Old Tremblefoot's head comes running out. And luckily for me, Josh vows revenge and goes off the deep end and attacks the wizard, which was great. It was a nice fitting end for old Tremblefoot. But for me, it was very bittersweet to see this character that I had grown so attached to over the years just gone, just done by the roll of a dice. And why do I bring this up? It was almost like I decided to bring this up serendipitously on a night about loss, but you make these decisions in D&D and sometimes you have to live with them. And as a DM, I encourage you guys to not be afraid of making hard decisions. Don't be afraid of letting go of characters, even if you love them. And don't be afraid to shake things up from time to time. So, guys, if you can with me, and I know some of you are drinkers out there, and I know it's been a little long-winded, and I know you probably didn't need to know all this, but I really felt like giving you guys a little history of Wilson Tremblefoot because I felt like his life, although fictional, deserved a little bit of accolades. And if you can with me, even if you have air in your glass, if we could just raise a glass and give a moment of dead air to old Miss Wilson Tremblefoot. May he rest in peace, even though you're a fictional asshole. Old Wilson Tremblefoot. Thank you guys for indulging me on that. I'm gonna go back to the chat. Let's see if you guys are saying anything. Let's see. Yeah, it was pretty interesting. Yeah, it was a 30+ year character. Yep, it's crazy. Lava says, what is that like even like a pre-built character? No, I built it from the ground up when I was first rolling. Let's see. Lavis, if you want to play, we'll work it out. Seriously. We can definitely do that. Most definitely, Cap. We would like them. We'd like to have them. Guys, if nobody, anybody here, if they haven't seen After Dark, go become a member of Den of Nerds Live and go watch Den After Dark. It is fantastic. I really enjoy it. You know, it's the show's got some edge. You know, it show's got some edge, and I really like it. So yeah, so that's if anybody has any questions about you, old Wilson Tremblefoot, or any DM questions like how you decide such things, ask them now. If not, I'm going to get set up on the second part of our show where we're going to take a look through the Art and Arcana book. Art and Arcana book is a visual history of Dungeons and Dragons written by Michael Whitwer, Kyle Newman, John Peterson, and Sam Whitwer, with a foreword by the first sexiest man in Dungeons and Dragons, Mr. Um, oh my God, how could I forget his name? He's my rival. So why Joe Manganiello? Why on earth could I forget that? By the way, Mr. Manganiello, I know you're the first sexiest man in Dungeons and Dragons. I know that, but I'm coming for you. Seeing as how this is second. Yeah. So, guys, let's see. Oops. So I'm trying a little hackneyed thing here. So I've got a second camera set up on my phone, and I'm going to try to shoot the book, the D&D book. I was going to try it on a tripod, but it's a little wonky. So I'm going to go handheld. If I get you guys seasick, then too damn bad. Y'all deserve it. Screw you guys. So let's see. Actually, it's going to be pretty tough. Oh, I just closed it out. Give me 1 second, guys. Nope. All right, so I just closed out the camera that I was using, so you're gonna have to give me a second here. So while I'm doing that, I guess I can give you guys a channel update. So look, how does everybody feel about doing doing the Dungeon Master Creates on Wednesday nights after this stream? Because you know how we're gonna be building a campaign from the ground up. I had initially wanted to do it on a different night, but how does everybody feel about doing it the same night, just doing it a little bit later? We'll just take a break after this stream, reconnoiter, and come back and doing it on Wednesday. How's everybody feel about that? There we go. Anybody have any ideas? So let's see. I'm gonna add the second camera to stream here. All right. So just think about that for a minute. So guys, take a look at this. This is the first page here. Look at this cool old 1980s fantasy gentleman there with his friend. And his friends with the Chief jersey. Or is that 49ers? Let me know if that's a 49ers jersey or a Chiefs jersey. What do you guys think in chat? You think that's a Chiefs jersey or 49ers? It's 49ers probably. Yeah. Who needs to hang around? I've got Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons basic fantasy set. Role-playing adventure game from TSR Hobbies. Available at game stores everywhere. So it used to be, if you think Dungeons and Dragons is big now, man. It was big back in the day. There's my man's. Yep. I'll just close it out. Sorry. Let's see. I'm going to load this back up. If you start at 10. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I mean, because we don't want to start it too late, right? Let's see. There we go. Okay. Let me mute this. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Yeah, so there's Joe Manganiello and his character, Archon. So, Chapter 1, Detect Magic. This is the... Are you guys getting an echo? Yeah. So I got audio off. Hold on one second, guys. Let me try something here. It's technical with difficulties.